Wild Lives by Faunographic.
Hey, I'm Rochelle and welcome to the Wild Lives podcast. Today I'd like to welcome back England-based naturalist and wildlife photographer James Rogerson, who has recently been working on some incredible photo projects with UK wildlife, particularly otters and badgers. Before we start chatting to James about all things badger, let's get some background on everyone's favourite mustelid, the otter.
While pesticide pollution in the waterways had all but wiped out Britain's otters by the 1970s, the Scottish population survived, and today there are more than 8,000 of them across the country, in lochs, rivers and along the coast. Otters can eat up to 15% of their own body weight per day, and as their eyesight is poor, they use their whiskers to track fish movements. One of the things that makes otters so endearing is their effervescent natures. In fact, the collective noun for a group of otters is a romp, which is not surprising, seeing as though they're such playful animals. In fact, they've been observed making mudslides on the riverbanks and sliding down them just for the fun of it.
Hey, James, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Rochelle. Good to speak to you.
Yeah, you too, mate. You've actually been spending a fair bit of time in Scotland this year and you've taken some awesome pics of otters there. What initially drew you to these animals?
I'd say it's probably the area that drew me there first. So the west coast of Scotland is, it's like one of the best wildlife havens we've got in the UK, and otters are a big part of that. So the location first, of course, you see signs of otters and want to see more of them, and they're probably one of the first animals I really wanted to get close to and photograph when I started with photography.
So why though did you choose otters? Are they like a special animal for you or a favourite?
Yeah, they definitely are. Yeah, they're so diverse and they live in such different worlds. So you get them in freshwater, coastal environments, the sea. They're nocturnal, they can be active during the day, they're proficient hunters on land and in water. They're just like, if you can imagine an animal with like superpowers, otters have got to be it. There aren't too many species that could make a go of so many different habitats. So yeah, what's not to love? I think if you see them, I tell you what, it sounds overblown, but if you've seen them, maybe even like a mother and tiny cubs that look so vulnerable out in a stormy sea fishing, and you think you're worried about them, and they're fine, and they cope in freezing temperatures, managing to catch fish, avoiding sharp rocks, and then just having a little roll off in the grass and then going back home for sleep.
You just mentioned that you'll often see the mum and the cubs out there frolicking together. Are the otters you observe social creatures, or are they pretty much loners apart from when they're young?
So it's yes and no. Now, if you talk about females, they're social when they're with their cubs. They spend the cubs are glued to them for a year or so, and they wean at about 13 months old. So they're glued to mum for that length of time. Once they're mature, she's going to kick them out of their territory. So outside of that sort of cycle, they're quite solitary. I mean, dog otters are better example. They're quite different. Almost completely solitary unless it comes to mating. And it's quite interesting, you'll get females won't tolerate other females in their territory, and males won't tolerate other males in their territory. So you'll get one male that might cover a few kilometers of coastline, and there'll be a couple of females within that area, but they don't tolerate members of the same sex at all. I have seen a couple of examples where that's happened, but they tend to be related animals. And even then, they avoid each other by being active at different times of the day. So I can think of one stretch of coastline where there's two female otters breeding animals. In fact, they've both got cubs at the moment, probably side by the same male. One of them is active at night and one of them is active during the day. It could be a coincidence, but it looks to me like that's a measure to sort of keep out of each other's way, to sit side by side and live side by side without too much conflict.
That's pretty amazing. How about with their food, though? Have you learnt how they find it or hunt for it?
Yeah, so I said, the different habitats that they hunt in, and they take advantage of lots of different types of food sources throughout the year. Obviously, we're talking about otters mainly on the coast, and that's where you're more likely to see them. Coastal otters hunt at very particular times. So they usually go for low tide. So what happens is when the tide goes out, there's more of the seabed exposed, and an otter that's got maybe a 20-second time limit, for holding its breath, can then access more of that seabed. If they were, hunting out at high tide, they wouldn't really be able to access much of the seabed and access the crabs and the small fish and things like that live down there. But it's not only marine, environment that they take advantage of. Freshwater otters will take advantage of birds as well. There's nesting ducks and moorhens and coots, baby swans. So don't hate otters just because they eat baby swans, but I've heard that. Other small mammals as well. I've seen them bringing things like lobster. I watched one that's quite interesting recently, bringing a ray, a huge thornback ray. I mean, with the length of the tail, it was probably something like 4 or 5 feet. And it's, there's just these huge sort of flaps of white fins coming out of the water, and this fight in a harbour. Incredible to watch. And, of course, the otter managed to overpower it, dragged it in and ate it underneath the harbour. But anything that they can try and take, they will do. They use the sense of smell to find their food. And there's some interesting research that's been done recently that suggests that what they actually do is when they get close to where they think their prey is, they blow a bubble of air around their nose, and they'll have their nose wedged into a sort of, a rock or rocky crevices or seaweed, and that will enable them to smell where their prey is, much better, because, of course, they can smell better through air rather than through water. Yeah, they're incredible.
What about in urban environments? I think you mentioned when we were talking before we actually started recording something about there's a potential of an otter that you found in an urban environment recently.
Yeah, there's a couple of urban otters, and there's a couple of spots that I've been keeping an eye on with trail cameras. So the one that we were talking about, it's a bit of a long shot, but I managed to find a spot along a canal in a city where something had been eating pigeons on the side of the canal. And there's only one area along this, because often canal sides are flat concrete. They're quite difficult for animals to get out of, but there's one area where the bank's collapsed and there's a bit of a slope. And I just found these pigeon carcasses that had been eaten. And this is what they do. When otters, they'll have a favourite haul out. So even when they're fishing out in the sea and they're going out to get crabs and fish and sea urchins and things like that, they'll bring them into their favourite spot where they feel comfortable and eat them on the bank. So something they've been doing that with pigeons. I think it could well be an urban otter. They do roost on some of the low-hanging bridges over the canal. You've got a duck to get underneath them, so they're only 5 foot high. So it's not beyond the realms of possibility that an otter would be able to smell those pigeons, climb up there, take them into the water, probably drown them, and then eat them on the bank. But I've not got any footage. It's a busy spot. It's in a city. I've left a few trail cameras out there at night, but I've not managed to catch them yet. But hopefully, fingers crossed, I'll manage to catch them at it. And I do know of some otters that live in a theme park that's got water and water rides, and that's, it's a pretty noisy, busy place. And I've got a few bits of footage. I've had a trail camera, a DSLR camera trap system out there for quite a long time, and not managed to catch them. But they're so wary. Their sense of smell is so good. They'll know that there's something there that's not usually there. I've caught them on trail cameras, but not managed to get the interesting shots with a DSLR and flash systems yet.
In a theme park, where would they even live in a theme park?
So it's got a river that runs alongside it, and some of the rides are water-based, and they're along these stretches of pools and rivers. So there's a lot of water there. There are a lot of fish there as well. So it's not that surprising. I actually found this huge pikehead. It's about 30 centimetres long, and the tail was just floating. It was right next to the otter's spraint site. So you can often tell they're there. If you're looking for signs of otters, the one thing, the best sort of telltale sign, if you like, is their spraint, so their droppings. And they're usually on really conspicuous rocks or bumps along the edge of a river and along coastlines as well. They'll use a conspicuous spot because it's an advert to other otters that they're there. So if you know where to look, you can see them, and they're definitely there. The spraints are there, fresh spraints. Caught them on trail cameras. They're eating the fish that are in these lakes and rivers, even though there are rides going along above them. And apparently, there's some of the security guys that say that they've seen them there, during the day as well. I think people don't notice them. They're too busy getting their thrills on the rides and don't notice they're there, but they are.
They're pretty surprising little dudes. What other behaviours, apart from them living amongst us like that, what other behaviours do you find surprising?
I guess some of the different kinds of prey species that they go for. So even the marine sort of coastal otters at certain times of the year will take to freshwater pools that might be close to the coastline and go for things like toads. So frogs and toads make up quite a big part of their diet around sort of, March, April, that sort of time of year when they're spawning, and they're all, they're easy pickings. And I've come across this a few times where they skin toads. So toads have got toxins in their skin. One of them is known as a bufotoxin, and it can induce vomiting, and it doesn't taste particularly nice. So it's a measure, to stop predators from eating them. You quite often see, species will grab, like even snakes will grab a hold of it and they'll regurgitate a toad and it will survive, even though it's been half eaten because of these toxins. But an otter will catch it and skin it and get rid of all the toxins and eat all the fresh meat inside, that hasn't got any of that nasty toxin in it. And yeah, it's incredible. And I don't know how they manage to do it, because they've got these cute little paws, not unlike dog paws. They're not that dexterous. It's not like they've got like primate hands or anything like that, but they still manage to take the skin off, eat the flesh, and take advantage of it. Would be a glut of a food source.
It's just crazy. Like what you've told me now has just changed. Like I just see them as these little dudes that just scamper around and lie on their backs and, but like they're pretty stealthy and very, very clever. You've actually observed some pretty amazing stuff in the field recently because you've been photographing them. If you had to pick one close encounter, you can have more than one, but just start with one close encounter that you've had this year. Tell us about your favourite.
So maybe not this year. Last year, I had a really close encounter with some cubs, and it's really important that you don't let them get close to you. And when some good advice, if you're trying to photograph them, the aim is always to stay downwind, stay low, stay out of sight, and wait for them to come to you. So you can quite often see which direction they're swimming along a coast. They'll, leave their halt and swim one direction down the coast and look for different food sources, and then come back again as the tide comes in. So you'll know where they're headed, and they always go for the little rocky outcrops that stick out into the sea, and that's where they're going to come out, take any prey that they've caught and eat it. So if you can be in the right place, you can get the best shots without even having to move and without disturbing them. But sometimes, they take a U-turn and they go the wrong direction, and that's happened a couple of times. And I've literally, this is on Shetland, I've had a mother, 3 cubs. She's out fishing. The cubs are sort of following, not really paying too much attention. And they'd all disappeared. And then I couldn't find them. I was like looking, left and right, trying to stay low, no idea where they are. And then they emerge from the sea, right in front of you. Mum's got some food, drops the food. I think it was a scorpion fish, which is like a quite brightly coloured fish with these really long spikes. And the cubs are right in front eating the scorpion fish. No idea that I'm there, way too close to take any pictures. You don't want to because of the noise. And once Mum had gone, they settled down, and there was one of them was literally inches away from my boot, just sat there asleep, totally oblivious. I mean, you tend to get these close encounters with the youngsters because they're just not as wary. Mum's always really wary. But on this occasion, she hadn't even seen me, and she did come back, calls all the cubs to get back in the water, and they follow her along the coast again. But it's just like, you're worried, you don't want to disturb them, you don't want to separate them, and you've got to make sure that you don't do that if you're trying to photograph them. But on that occasion, it was all fine, but just looking at it, like, oh my goodness, because their eyesight's so poor, you see. So as long as you're staying downwind, which I was at the time, and you're staying low and you're not moving, they really don't know you're there.
That's amazing.
But yeah, I mean, yeah, every encounter is a magic encounter. There's always something new, and because they're so diverse in the way that they hunt, and because they're so active, they're on amphetamines. They're when they hunt, they're in and out, back up the sea, bring something out again. You just think, goodness me! And if you watch them, they're almost constantly eating small things they eat out at sea, so that you can, sometimes you can hear them if you're close enough, chomping away. It's only the big stuff that they tend to bring in, but it's literally non-stop. So that hunting, fishing period, when the tide's out low, they take advantage of that, and then once that's done, they go back and sleep it off. So if you've got them and you've got them in your line of sight, you're always guaranteed with something special. Something special is going to happen.
While everyone loves an otter, badgers do often cop a bad rap, mostly because they live in urban areas and also because of their perceived health risk to humans and to livestock. But are these creatures simply misunderstood?
The Eurasian badger belongs to the Mustelidae family, so it's related to weasels, wolverines and otters, and there are around 300,000 of them in the United Kingdom. Known for its distinctive black and white stripy faces and white-tipped ears, badgers are nocturnal, omnivorous and live underground. Their burrows, or setts, are complex constructions with different rooms, nests, tunnels and entrances, and these last generations, with some setts being hundreds of years old. Badgers are famously house-proud too. They line their setts with dry grass and bracken and are known to take this bedding outside periodically to air it out so as to remove fleas and lice. Inside the setts, badgers live in clans of up to 20 individuals. While woodlands are their preferred habitat, they are sometimes found in suburban and urban environments. As a result, around 50,000 badgers are killed on the UK's roads each year.
So, James, tell us about badgers. You've taken a stack of great photos of them over the years. What intrigues you about them?
Well, for a start, they're another mustelid. So they're related to otters, and like otters, they share that adaptability. They can take advantage of lots of different food sources throughout the year, living in different kinds of environments. And they're interesting as well because they occupy the same space that we do in the cities and in the countryside. It's just a different time scale. They're out at night, when we're all asleep.
So that means you do find them in urban environments, don't you?
Yeah, and it's surprising. People just don't often realise that they're there. So I've come across them in old pottery works. So the town that I live in has a long history of the ceramics industry, and a lot of these old areas that were part of a bustling industry are now disused. And these areas have been taken over by wildlife, foxes, badgers, and it's interesting. They use those as sort of little points, and that's where their home, that's where their set will be. But quite often you'll see them occasionally, scurrying across the road on next to sort of churchyards and those sort of places. Not where you'd expect them to be at all. I found a set recently underneath a bridge. It's a road bridge. It's quite busy. It's really close to the centre of town. And as far as I'm aware, nobody else knows that they're there. There's a park fairly close by. I always speak to local people. That's one of the best ways of getting, good intel. Just striking up a conversation. And I'd seen a few signs of badgers around, and everybody told me, no, they're not there. I couldn't find a set. So I was following some trails, and one of them sort of led along a low wall, and then they just went under the bridge, just disappeared under the bridge. So they don't have a conventional set that's a dug hole in the earth. They literally live under a concrete bridge, and they've got their own doorway. And I've got some footage that I've taken from a trail camera that I put inside. And it's interesting. They like to sort of sit underneath this shelter and look out, check the weather, smell, check everything's okay before they go out and feed. And as far as I'm aware, nobody knows they're there.
So these sets are actually in high traffic areas. Apparently, or from what I've read, 20 individuals can live in a set at any one time. How does that work socially? Are they related? Is there a hierarchy? What's the social dynamic like?
Yeah, so they can be pretty busy places, badger sets. Generally, they are somewhat related, and that depends on the sex of the animals. So the boars, and male badgers are referred to as boars, are where the genetic mixing goes on. So they will up and leave and move into different territories, as they mature. So the cubs mature, the males will go off and move to different territories. It's interesting because there are far fewer boars within a set, and part of that is to do with the fact that they end up coming into contact with traffic and persecution because they're out roaming a lot more. There's a much higher mortality rate. So there where the genetic mixing goes on. Not to say that the females don't move as well, because that does happen occasionally. You've also got a situation where dominant females are the only ones that breed within a set. It's not always the case, but generally the case. So you've got a subordinate female. Sometimes she will move because she wants to have her cubs. So she'll go and, make a set on our own somewhere. But also you can get badger sets with just a couple in there. You know, some of these urban ones tend to be quite small, and there'll be the little pockets of, you know, urban sets dotted around. And it's interesting because they also create these way markers, territory boundaries, if you like. So badgers will deposit their scat, their feces, in something called a latrine. And they're quite often on the edge of badger territories. So you'll be able to see, you know, lines through a field maybe. You know, they're quite obvious badger trails because they're quite low to the ground and they're quite stocky animals. And then you'll see where the latrines are, and they'll mark the edge of a territory. They also sometimes use them to mark favourite feeding areas. So they're really fond of blackberry bushes. And, you know, if that's their favourite feeding spot, then you'll see, you know, lots of little pits, about a fist-sized pit with badger poo in there. And that's a good way of them saying, you know, this is our feeding spot, you know, communicating that information to other badger clans that might be nearby.
What are some of the other interesting behaviours that you've heard about or observed from them?
So, again, another mustelid. Everything revolves around food. Life revolves around food. Badgers have got the most amazing sense of smell. Otters have got a good sense of smell. Badgers even better. I mean, these guys can smell, you know, earthworms in the ground, and that's their primary food source. However, they'll go for other things. And I've heard some anecdotal evidence of badgers, you know, getting into water to look for prey. And I know somewhere locally it's got a badger set next to a river. And this is somewhere where they have a lot of red signal crayfish, which are actually an invasive species. And you know, I've seen bits of chewed up crayfish on the banks of this river. And I know there are no otters there, because that would be the obvious go-to answer for those sort of signs, but there are no otters there. And I spoke to some of the park wardens, and, you know, they said, yeah, it could be. We think it might be. It's not something I've managed to capture yet. I haven't put a camera out there, but I wouldn't put it past them. And I do know that they will swim out to sometimes quite far, nesting birds on sandbanks. So the badgers can smell those birds out on the sandbank, and they'll swim out there. They're not really going for the adult birds. They take the eggs, and they can devastate, you know, entire colonies of nesting birds. So if there's an opportunity there, then they will take it. They're not just a carnivore. Of course, they'll take berries at certain times of the year, and they'll climb up to low-hanging trees as well, and finding their way wherever that smell leads them, to be honest. If there's something there, they'll take advantage. There's lots of stories as well about people putting up fences. You know, new housing estates being built, you know, on a badger's feeding trail, and they put up these fences, and then, you know, within a few days, a badger smashed a hole through because, you know, you put it in the way of its favourite trail to lead to its blackberry bushes or, you know, whatever. So, yeah, they're pretty tough animals, despite the fact that they get a hard time, you know.
So you just mentioned that, you know, they potentially live in the same habitat, or their habitat would overlap potentially with an otter's. Who would win a fight between a badger and an otter?
I mean, the badgers, obviously, yeah. There are very few things. They're quite a stocky, heavy animal, especially a boar. You know, the males are really big animals. And they're our biggest carnivore in the UK. We don't have anything else, you know. Foxes we have, but they're quite slightly built. They're nowhere near as heavy and as powerful as a badger. Something that's quite interesting, if you look at their skull, they have, I mean, this is to do with defense, you know, they don't really need such a strong skull. They've got this crest along the back of their skull called a sagittal crest, and it's where the jaw muscles attach. And a badger's bite is incredibly strong, and that's all about defense, you know, defending themselves against, I guess, what would have been, you know, wolves, you know, things like that, or the predators that we used to have in this country, bears maybe, that might try and dig them out of a set. But yeah, they're a tough animal. Yeah, you wouldn't want to if you see one by the side of the road and it's been injured, you don't try and pick it up. Yeah, you try and, you know, call the right people and get it dealt with safely.
What's been your favourite badger encounter so far?
I think it's probably when cubs come out. You know, so early on in the summer, you will see the cubs start to emerge, and a lot like, you know, I was talking about the otter cubs being a lot less wary of people. Cubs are the same. Cubs are the same with badgers. You know, they haven't really learnt to fear people, so getting to watch them play is pretty special. And you know, they're all around, chase each other around. Quite often, when I'm trying to get badgers used to me, I will use a bit of bait to sort of smooth things over. Something like peanut butter, peanuts, and I think on one occasion I put a little bit of peanut butter up in a tree just to sort of, you know, get their attention, and, you know, occasionally you get to see them climb up there. Well, they were taking turns. We've got two cubs taking turns to climb up the tree, try and get to the peanut butter, and as one was climbing, the other one would grab one by the tail, pull it out of the tree, and then it'd startle it, it'd run off a little bit, and the other one would get up there, and then the one that had run off would come back, say, hang on, you know, that's mine. grab the other animal by the tail, pull it out the tree, and this sort of went on for a couple of minutes. Yeah, they're incredible. I mean, if you get the chance to sort of watch them and them not be aware that you're there, you get to see all these sort of, these really interesting behaviours. You just imagine them as just like a dirt snuffling little stocky furball, but there's so much more to it than that when you watch them interact with each other.
From the other side of the world, it's kind of hard to understand what's going on with the badger cull. Can you explain a little bit about it?
Okay, so the evidence is pretty straightforward. It's the politics that's complicated. Basically, badgers get TB.
What's TB?
TB, bovine tuberculosis. They catch it from cattle, from infected cattle. And we have quite a lot of infected cattle in the UK. Part of that was because we had a foot and mouth outbreak some sort of 20 years ago. We've had more than one. And a lot of farms lost all their cattle. And in order to repopulate, they temporarily stopped TB screening. And the number of TB instances in cattle actually went up something like 200, 300%. It was an insane increase. So we've spread it ourselves. It's not the badgers' fault. The badgers are just sort of suffering from poor biosecurity within the dairy and beef industry. So a lot of people in the government and with the support of farmers have introduced the badger cull. So really, they've been a bit of a scapegoat. So most of the issue is with cattle and biosecurity, but it's an easy option to point a gun at something, rather than look at your own shortcomings within an industry and have an overhaul and solve the problem at its source. Really, this cull is to placate farmers that have suffered, and they have suffered with TB, that if their cattle test positive, then they have to be put to sleep. But it's even more complicated because the test is about only 50% effective. So it only, shows up as positive 50% of the time. So it's only sort of half accurate. And most of the TB transmission, it's over 90%, is from within the herd. It's not from badgers at all. So they're a symptom of the problem. And of course, animal welfare groups quite rightly up in arms about it. There are other options. So there's a vaccination scheme, and in one particular county in Derbyshire, they've really sort of, run with this vaccination scheme, which is incredibly cheap because it's run mainly by volunteers. It works out, and I'm talking in pounds here, so it's about sort of £80 per animal, per badger, to be vaccinated. And the cull, in comparison, can cost, between sort of anything up to sort of £5,000 and £20,000 wow. per badger, depending on how it's been financed and where it's been run. So, it's just a shame. They're a protected species, and within living memory, this sort of thing just hasn't happened before. And there are so many examples all over the world where an animal has had a bounty on its head, because that's what's happened here. People are being paid £50, per head, per badger shot. You do something like that, to a protected species, and it just sets such a poor precedent, even in areas where the badger cull hasn't been approved and hasn't been rolled out officially. We're starting to see, more instances of crime against badgers. So they've been illegally shot just because people think, well, it's happening elsewhere, well, I'll deal with the situation myself. It kind of justifies it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. I mean, the only consolation that I can take from that at the moment is that you get some fantastic photos of them. And so if we can promote a bit more about their lives and their importance in their native environment, that's, one way to help counterattack it, really, isn't it?
It is. I mean, you're not going to change a farmer's mind. I mean, you can imagine if you've lost half of your stock to TB, you're going to do anything possible, anything you possibly can to stop that from happening again. Why take a chance? I do understand it. And you say, taking pictures at different sets. Well, I've had two of my best locations disturbed this year, and one of them I don't know why. It's a set that's not too far from me, and over the past 2 years, really, to get them used to me. Last year, I got some great images. This year, I haven't even seen them emerge before dark, and I'm certain they're not in a cull zone, but they are close to dairy farms. And I'm certain, there's some sort of negative interaction that they've had with people has caused that. There's no other reason really for them to change so dramatically. And I even photographed guys digging out a badger set at another location that I've worked at in the past. Yeah, tragic. Reported it to the police, but it didn't go any further. But still, badger set's supposed to be protected.
Well, it's certainly a complicated issue, but in the meantime, we'll enjoy looking at all your amazing pics and following your adventures through Scotland and the UK. Thank you so much for your time today, James. It's been awesome to catch up.
Yeah, good to speak to you, Michelle, as always.
Thanks for listening. If you haven't yet looked up James's amazing otter and badger photos, do yourself a favour and check them out on his website at www.jr-wildlife.com and on Instagram at jr.wildlife. You can also buy his prints and grab some info about his wildlife photography workshops. Of course, I'll post all those links on Faunographic.com, where you'll also find all our podcast episodes. Have a listen and let us know what you think. Till next time, happy wildlifing.
Wild Lives by Faunographic. Check out our wildlife photo gallery at faunographic.com and on Instagram at Faunographic.